So it's Tobago Talks, and when Tobago Talk, we listen. And Martin George joins me now to give his unique perspective on this impasse and all the shenanigans we are seeing there in Tobago. Martin, great to see you as always. Welcome.
Yes, hi, good morning to you, JW, and good morning, Trinidad, and a very special good morning to Tobago.
Indeed, as always. You know, Martin, I was saying in my opening monologue, yes, it's the cultural, debacle, the whole issue of the financing and the folks going out there and not having accommodation. Yes, it's unfortunate. We could probably dissect that during the course of the discussion. But I'm looking at this from more governance issue and an issue of leadership style. You know, you're seeing Farley being a little more diplomatic, obviously trying to ventilate in the public domain what would have transpired. You could tell, obviously, he is very frustrated also based on some of the accusations coming his way. You're also seeing a different style with Mr. Duke. Not really surprised. I said this morning, you could take the man or the trade union, you can't take the union or the man. So Mr. Duke is still coming forward with his groundsman, you know, in-your-face, confrontational union style in his new role as Deputy Chief Sec. From your lens, with your intimate understanding of Tobago, how Tobago taking this? How this looking on the ground? How people looking at this particular scenario? Because we're all looking on it, and we're not too sure how this one is going to pan out.
Unsettled. People are very unsettled, JW, and you know the reality is that even among THA workers and staff members, tensions are rising and people are feeling uncomfortable because, you know, it's like you are almost now being pitched to choose a side. You know, are you in the Farley camp or the Watson camp? You know, who are you secretly supporting? Why are you doing this? Are you backing Farley by doing that, or are you backing Watson? So even, you know, in the workplace, in the THA offices, in the divisions, people are feeling the pressure, the tension. The public is very concerned because it certainly is not something that you want to see or that you were expecting to see, at least certainly not at such an early stage, you know, and this is basically internecine warfare in the belly and bosom of the party. So it's not good for that. It's not good for business. It's not good for Tobago. You know, I had suggested, you know, to them a few days ago that they should try to confine the Bacchanal for the upcoming Tobago Carnival. But it appears that notwithstanding those urgings, they choose to bring it, you know, front and center in the political arena. And basically now it's on the floor of the assembly with Mr. Augustine throwing down his challenge yesterday to Mr. Duke to say, well, basically, you know, come for me, you know. I mean, it's almost like reminiscent of, you know, you remember years ago with that famous fight Muhammad Ali had, Rumble in the Jungle.
Yes.
You know, so this looks like now, this is the Tobago version. This looks like it's what, the Congo Bongo in Tobago, you know?
The political rumble in the jungle. Let me ask you, as a respected voice, a respected personality, with your particular hat as chamber president there in Tobago, did you reach out to the two personalities to mediate, to try to, you know, strike that balance, to be the referee, as it were, before it gets to any kind of rumble in the jungle? Did you reach out to these two men personally?
I made a public call for this, and you know, I think lots of people are aware that publicly I have offered the services of, you know, of the chamber as a mediator and a facilitator for brokering some type of peace and some type of, you know, unity going forward. I have not sought to, you know, reach out individually to them in that regard because I think it ought to be done in the presence of each other if I'm speaking to them. So they know that I have extended that offer. As yet, I haven't seen any movement towards taking it up, you know, but we continue to be available in whatever way possible. Because I'll tell you something, JW, this is never good for any country or any island when you have this type of fracture erupting and, you know, I mean, the schisms running so deeply. Look at what happened to Boris Johnson recently in the UK, you know, when members of his own party revolted, you know, and then you had people choosing sides as to those who supported Boris, those who were against Boris, and eventually Boris had to step down. You know, so these things can never end well. There's no good end for something like this.
And imagine that happened in the Conservative Party. So you would think, you know, that happened there. Let me ask you, because today, when you hold on to The Guardian, I want you to go to page 5, Martin, because on page 5, they're talking about this no confidence motion and, you know, the latest concerning the impasse. And there's a very interesting part where they're suggesting here, this is Mr. Farley is saying, that they're supposed to meet today, right, the executive, in a virtual meeting, and he's saying that Mr. Duke is expected to attend. And he says, subsequent to the meeting, the country will know what the position of the government would be. So I suspect by sunset this evening, there might be a greater understanding as to where they go from here. What's the worst case scenario? Well, we know the best case scenario. They kiss, they make up, and they keep the momentum going. What's the worst case scenario? The worst of worst that could come out of this?
Right, worst case scenario is governed by Section 35 of the THA Act. It says where the assemblymen pass a resolution declaring that they have no confidence in the Chief Secretary or the Deputy Chief Secretary, and the Chief Secretary or Deputy Chief Secretary, as the case may be, does not, within 2 days of the passing of such a resolution, resign, the President shall revoke the appointment of the Chief Secretary or Deputy Chief Secretary, as the case may be. So in other words, JW, if it is that there is some intention for one side or the other to bring a no confidence motion, then clearly, based upon the results of that, you will see persons having to resign if the motion is carried. Because if you don't resign, Section 35 makes it pellucid that this president will revoke your appointment, Martin, in 2 days' time.
If it comes down to a no confidence, Farley put out the challenge recently. It's 15 people that make up the THA assembly.
You have 15 assemblymen.
We have 14 on the PDP side and one PNM,
yes,
right?
One PNM. You have the 4 councillors, and you have the presiding officer. So
the councillors are also able to vote in this regard?
They are part of the assembly. They are part of the assembly, and the presiding officer also is part of the assembly. So therefore, you see, in a situation such as this, you have to very closely look at the numbers in terms of who may have support, in terms of, on a personal level as to who is backing who. I have no predictions. I can't say one way or the other, except maybe we could probably make an educated guess that Dr. Faith B. Israel is not likely to support Mr. Watson Duke after her being publicly fired by Mr. Duke recently, as a deputy leader of the party.
Which again brings such a next dimension as you peel back the layers of the story, because here it is, Ms. Faith and of course Mr. Farley, they have a role and function in the THA, important roles and function, but as it relates to the party, the vessel that brought them into governance, it seems, based on their firing, there is no particular role. So I'm wondering now, as it relates to Mr. Duke, if he is able to know and understand something, or there is a great ambition where, yes, he would have used these personalities in Tobago, brought them into his fold to go forward and win the election. But again, his role and function is more or less behind the curtain. He's not really the face. I'm wondering if, ultimately, in his heart of hearts, he wants to be the face, he wants to be the man. Is this a push to take on the role of Chief Secretary as opposed to Deputy?
Well, the thing is, if you talk in no confidence motions, remember, you can bring a no confidence motion in the Chief Secretary, you could bring one against the Deputy Chief Secretary. In either case, basically, it's going to be one man left standing. You can't have 2 man rats living in one hole. And each one of them is basically saying, I am the man rat, and I should be in charge. So ultimately, to follow your line of questioning, it would seem that the end game for Mr. Duke is basically not just to wrest control of the party, but it appears to seize control of the assembly based upon what has been played out in the public space. So yes, it can only be that it's one or the other in charge, when the dust settles, after this showdown at high noon.
I wonder now if these shenanigans, what's playing out again, PDP, relatively new party compared to the opposition that they would have, as I continue to say, they gave PNM a softening. That wasn't even a beating anymore. That was a softening that we saw. Would this now give PNM the impetus to regroup, to go back into the community and say, listen, we are the establishment. You didn't see this scenario with us playing out in the public domain. You all went with this new entity. You think this could give PNM any kind of political mileage at all when it comes back down to whether it be TSA or general, which will be around the corner?
There will be a certain amount of traction which that argument will attract. However, there's a whole lot more that needs to be done by the PNM to regain the trust of the people in Tobago. So in other words, the people may say, well, listen, okay, our vehicle is giving some trouble, the engine is malfunctioning, but I'm not sure they're ready to abandon the vehicle to go in a different maxi taxi, if you understand. The maxi taxi hasn't broken down by the side of the road yet and, is totally unable to move. It's functioning with some problems.
Yes,
so I'm not sure that it's sufficient for the general public. Because, I mean, let's face the fact. You would have had many persons who would have previously voted for the PNM who, in this last THA election, would have voted for the PDP. So, they would have switched allegiance. And the fact that this is happening, of course, some of them may have buyer's remorse and they may be wondering, well, what did I vote for? What did I, sign up for? But the overwhelming majority of 14-1 is not something I think that is going to be so easily, swung back the other side unless the PDP implodes upon itself.
Yeah.
So that's why I say, unless the Maxi really shuts down totally.
Yeah.
But if it keeps going, I mean, with these problems in the engine, persons may stay on board, and may be willing to see if the problems can be fixed.
Well, let's see if things work out today with that virtual meeting. I look forward to the developments. And as always, we thank you for your insight and your counsel, Martin. Have a great one. We'll talk soon.
Always a pleasure and a great morning to you.
Definitely, Martin George. Always a real pleasure to have conversations there with Martin. We take a very quick one and we come back. News update at 7 and much more happening on the other side. See you soon.